Negativity is often misunderstood as an emotion, a mood, or a temporary state of mind. That misunderstanding is dangerous. Negativity is not just how you feel, it is how you operate. It shapes decisions, distorts judgment, and quietly dictates outcomes long before results appear. When negativity takes root, it doesn't announce itself as a threat. It presents itself as realism, caution, or intelligence. And that is exactly why it becomes a strategic liability. Every serious actor, whether an individual or an institution, relies on accurate assessment. Clear thinking is the foundation of effective action. Negativity interferes with that process. It narrows perception, exaggerates risk while minimizing opportunity. It turns uncertainty into fear and complexity into paralysis. Over time, it trains the mind to expect failure, and expectation influences behavior. People prepare less when they expect less. They invest less when they believe outcomes are predetermined. They hesitate when decisiveness is required. Negativity also drains resources, not financial resources, but cognitive and emotional ones. Energy is finite, attention is finite, willpower is finite. When those resources are consumed by self-doubt, resentment, or constant internal conflict, there is less available for execution. A person weighed down by negative thinking is always reacting, never shaping. Always defending, never advancing. This is not a personality issue, it is a performance issue. Strategic weakness often begins internally. Before any external defeat occurs, there is usually an internal concession, a belief that the odds are too high, a belief that effort may not be worth it, a belief that others are more capable, more prepared, or more deserving. These beliefs rarely come from evidence. They come from repeated negative narratives that go unchallenged. Once accepted, they operate like assumptions, and assumptions guide strategy. Negativity also undermines consistency. When motivation depends on mood, output becomes unpredictable. One day there is effort, the next day hesitation. One moment there is ambition, the next there is retreat. Systems cannot function effectively under constant fluctuation. Progress requires repetition. Improvement requires sustained pressure. Negativity interrupts that process by constantly renegotiating commitment. It asks questions at moments when action is needed. It invites doubt into decisions that require firmness. There is also a social dimension to this liability. Negativity alters how others perceive reliability and competence. People may not consciously identify it, but they respond to it. Hesitation is noticed. Lack of conviction is felt. Over time, opportunities shift toward those who project clarity and resolve, not because they are flawless, but because they appear capable of carrying responsibility. Negativity weakens that projection, even when skill and intelligence are present. Importantly, negativity often disguises itself as caution. Caution has value. Recklessness destroys. But negativity is not caution. It is avoidance dressed as wisdom. Caution evaluates risk to enable action. Negativity magnifies risk to justify inaction. One prepares, the other postpones. One strengthens position, the other preserves comfort. The difference is subtle but decisive. When negativity becomes habitual, it begins to dictate long-term strategy. Goals are adjusted downward. Standards are quietly lowered. Ambition is redefined as arrogance. Over time, this creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Lower goals produce smaller results. Smaller results confirm negative expectations. Those expectations then justify even lower goals. This cycle does not collapse suddenly. It stabilizes at mediocrity. The most dangerous aspect of negativity is that it feels rational. It aligns with fear, memory, and past experience. It uses evidence selectively. It reminds you of what went wrong, not what went right. It emphasizes cost, not potential. Because it sounds reasonable, it is rarely challenged. And because it is rarely challenged, it becomes policy. Strategic environments reward those who can tolerate pressure without internal collapse. Pressure is unavoidable. Failure is unavoidable. Uncertainty is unavoidable. Negativity, however, is optional. It is not a requirement of realism. It is a choice of interpretation. Those who fail to recognize this mistake endurance for wisdom, pessimism for intelligence. Negativity does not make you safer. It makes you slower. It does not protect you from loss. It prepares you for retreat. And in any competitive environment, internal or external, retreat without necessity weakens position. When you allow negativity to persist, you are not being cautious. You are conceding leverage, you are surrendering initiative, you are allowing internal resistance to dictate external outcomes. Strategy begins in the mind, and a compromised mind produces compromised results. Most people treat their mind as a place of comfort rather than a structure of function. They assume it exists to make them feel safe, validated, or emotionally protected. That assumption is costly. The mind is not a sanctuary designed to shield you from discomfort. It is a system designed to process information, assess reality, and guide action. When it stops functioning as a system and becomes an emotional refuge, performance declines. A system has rules, it has inputs, processes, and outputs. What enters the system matters. What is repeated becomes normalized. What is rewarded becomes dominant. The mind works the same way. Every thought you allow is an input. Every habit of thinking is a process. Every decision and behavior is an output. If the outputs are weak, inconsistent, or self-defeating, the problem is rarely external. The problem lies in what the system has been trained to accept. Unlike physical systems, the mind has no automatic filter. It does not distinguish between useful and useless information unless you impose that distinction. Negative self-talk, unresolved resentment, imagined failure, and borrowed opinions all enter freely. Once inside, they compete for influence. Over time, the most frequently repeated ideas gain authority. They shape perception not because they are true, but because they are familiar. When people say they are overthinking, what they often mean is that their system is overloaded. Too many unregulated inputs, too many unresolved signals. A system under constant strain does not produce clarity. It produces noise. Decisions become harder not because they are complex, but because the system is cluttered. Emotional fatigue replaces analysis. Reaction replaces strategy. Treating the mind as a sanctuary encourages indulgence. Every feeling is honored. Every fear is given space. Every doubt is allowed to speak. While emotional awareness has value, unregulated emotional dominance destabilizes the system. Feelings are transient. Systems require consistency. When mood dictates behavior, reliability collapses. Progress becomes dependent on internal weather rather than external necessity. A functioning system prioritizes utility over comfort. It asks one central question: does this thought improve or weaken my ability to act effectively? If it weakens, it is flagged. If it distracts, it is limited. If it undermines execution, it is removed. This is not suppression, it is management. No serious system allows harmful processes to run unchecked simply because they exist. Memory plays a critical role in this structure. The mind stores past experiences not as neutral data, but as interpreted narratives. Failures, embarrassments, and losses are often given more weight than success. This imbalance distorts risk assessment. The system begins to overestimate threat and underestimate capability. Past pain becomes a reference point rather than a lesson. When that happens, the system is no longer adaptive, it becomes defensive. Another vulnerability appears when the mind is treated as private property rather than operational infrastructure. People assume that what happens inside their head affects only them. That is incorrect. Internal systems produce external behavior. Behavior influences outcomes. Outcomes affect reputation, opportunity, and trajectory. A poorly managed internal system has consequences beyond the individual. It limits influence, leadership, and trust. Attention is the most valuable resource within the system. Whatever receives sustained attention gains influence. Negativity thrives on unmanaged attention. It repeats itself not because it is powerful, but because it is unchecked. A disciplined system reallocates attention deliberately. It does not eliminate emotion, but it refuses to let emotion override purpose. Structure does not eliminate humanity, it preserves it. A mind without structure is vulnerable to every impulse, every fear, every external opinion. A structured mind can experience emotion without being controlled by it. It can acknowledge doubt without obeying it. It can register fear without allowing it to set direction. The idea that the mind should always feel safe is a modern illusion. Growth requires exposure to discomfort. Decision-making requires confrontation with uncertainty. A sanctuary avoids these pressures. A system engages them. One protects feelings. The other protects function. Systems are maintained through discipline, not inspiration. You do not wait to feel like managing inputs. You do it because neglect creates instability. You do not negotiate with every thought. You enforce standards. Over time, the system adapts. Noise decreases. Signal strengthens. Response becomes measured instead of reactive. When the mind is treated as a system, responsibility shifts inward. External conditions lose some of their power. Not because they disappear, but because the internal process handling them improves. Strength does not come from eliminating difficulty. It comes from organizing how difficulty is processed. A sanctuary seeks peace by avoidance. A system achieves stability through control. One shields you from reality. The other equips you to face it. Most people believe emotions are spontaneous. They think feelings arrive uninvited, triggered by circumstances beyond their control. That belief removes responsibility and creates confusion. Emotions are not random. They are responses shaped by incentives. What you repeatedly reward with attention, justification, and repetition becomes emotionally dominant. What you tolerate grows. What you challenge weakens. The mind is not neutral. It reinforces patterns that receive engagement. When a negative thought appears and is examined, replayed, and emotionally validated, the system learns that this thought matters. It assigns it weight. Over time, the emotional response becomes automatic. Fear strengthens because it is listened to. Anger persists because it is indulged. Doubt becomes familiar because it is given airtime. Emotion does not lead behavior as much as people think. Behavior trains emotion. If avoidance is rewarded with temporary relief, fear increases. If excuses are rewarded with comfort, discipline declines. If self-criticism is rewarded with sympathy, it becomes habitual. The system adapts to incentives, not intentions. This is why people remain stuck despite awareness. They know their thoughts are harmful, yet they continue engaging with them. They analyze them, explain them, defend them. Each interaction is an incentive. The mind registers importance, not accuracy. It does not ask whether a thought is useful. It asks whether it is reinforced. Negativity often survives because it offers short-term benefits. It provides explanation for failure. It reduces responsibility. It lowers expectations. These are incentives. They may feel protective, but they are costly. The system chooses immediate relief over long-term strength when incentives are misaligned. Consider how fear operates. Fear is not sustained by danger alone. It is sustained by attention. When fear appears and you stop moving, delay action, or retreat, fear is rewarded. The system learns that fear is effective. It becomes louder next time. This is not weakness. It is conditioning. The same applies to confidence. Confidence is not produced by positive thinking alone. It is produced when decisive action is rewarded with progress, learning, or stability. When action happens despite discomfort and survival follows, the system updates its expectations. Emotion adjusts accordingly. Courage grows because it is reinforced by experience. People often try to change how they feel without changing what they reward. They want calm while continuing to feed anxiety. They want confidence while rehearsing doubt. They want motivation while reinforcing procrastination. The system cannot reconcile these contradictions. It follows incentives. Incentives are not always external. Internal incentives are often stronger. Self-pity can be rewarding. It attracts attention, excuses, and emotional release. Resentment can feel empowering. It offers moral superiority and justification. Over time, these emotions embed themselves not because they are accurate, but because they are reinforced. This is where discipline matters. Discipline changes incentives. It removes rewards from destructive patterns. It limits attention. It shortens engagement. It refuses emotional negotiation. When a negative thought no longer receives energy, it weakens. Not immediately, but inevitably. The system resists at first. It has been trained. It expects a payoff. When the payoff disappears, intensity increases. Thoughts become louder. Emotions spike. Many people interpret this as failure. It is not, it's extinction behavior. The system is testing whether the old incentive structure still exists. Consistency matters more than intensity. You do not eliminate negative emotion by force. You eliminate it by starving it. No audience, no justification, no repetition. Over time, the system relocates energy toward what produces results. Positive emotions are not created by affirmations. They are created by alignment between effort and outcome. One effort consistently leads to movement. Even small movement, the system recalibrates. Hope increases because it is earned. Motivation stabilizes because it is supported by evidence. Emotion follows incentives in social environments as well. People who are constantly reassured for weakness remain fragile. People who are respected for competence become resilient. This is not cruelty. It is reinforcement. Systems respond to what works. Internal dialogue functions the same way. If self-criticism is rewarded with improvement, it stays constructive. If it is rewarded with paralysis, it becomes destructive. The difference lies in what follows: the thought, action or retreat, responsibility or excuse. You cannot control every emotion that appears. You can control which ones you empower. Every response is a vote. Every repetition strengthens a pathway. Over time, emotional patterns solidify identity. When incentives are misaligned, emotions sabotage goals. When incentives are aligned, emotions support execution. The shift does not happen through insight alone. It happens through repeated behavioral reinforcement. The system does not care what you say you want. It cares what you reward. Most people search for clarity by adding more information, more motivation, more reassurance. They believe confusion exists because something is missing. In reality, confusion usually exists because something unnecessary remains. Clarity is not built through accumulation. It is revealed through subtraction. The mind does not struggle because it lacks ideas. It struggles because it holds too many competing ones. Every unresolved thought, every lingering doubt, every half-formed fear occupies space. Together, they create interference. When interference increases, signal weakens, decision-making slows. Action feels heavier than it should. People often wait for clarity before acting. That wait becomes indefinite. Clarity rarely arrives in a crowded mental environment. It emerges when distractions are removed and priorities are enforced. Action then becomes possible not because all answers are known, but because noise has been reduced. Removal is uncomfortable. It requires letting go of familiar explanations. Excuses are familiar. They protect that ego and reduce risk. Duddy feels responsible. Overanalysis is familiar. It feels intelligent. Removing these patterns feels like exposure. The system loses its buffers. That discomfort is often mistaken for danger. Information overload creates the illusion of preparedness. Constant researching, constant consumption, constant comparison give the appearance of progress. In reality, they delay commitment. Each new input reopens decisions that should already be closed. Momentum disappears. Clarity demands boundaries. Boundaries determine what is relevant and what is not. Without boundaries, everything competes for attention. With boundaries, focus becomes possible. Focus is not a natural state. It is enforced. Removal also applies to identity. People cling to outdated self-descriptions. Past failures become labels. Temporary weaknesses become permanent traits. These identities create internal resistance. Every new attempt conflicts with the old story. The system hesitates not because capability is absent, but because alignment is missing. Letting go of outdated identity creates space for adaptation. This is not denial of history. It is refusal to be governed by it. When identity loosens, behavior becomes flexible. When behavior changes, results follow. Clarity also disappears when too many goals compete. And want everything creates movement toward nothing. Each goal pulls attention in a different direction. Progress stalls. Removal requires choosing what not to pursue. That choice feels like loss. In reality, it is precision. Emotional clutter is another obstacle. Resentment, regret, and unresolved conflict occupy attention long after the event has passed. They consume energy without producing value. People revisit them hoping for resolution. Instead, they reinforce frustration. Resolution comes from decision, not repetition. Removing emotional clutter does not require approval or closure from others. It requires acceptance of reality and withdrawal of attention. Attention is currency. Where it flows, influence grows. When attention is reclaimed, emotional charge fades. Clarity strengthens when internal standards replace external validation. Constant comparison introduces endless variables. Someone else's progress becomes a distraction. Someone else's opinion becomes weight. Removal here means narrowing reference points. Progress is measured against intention, not approval. Decision-making improves when irrelevant metrics are removed. Not every outcome needs to be optimized. Not every reaction needs to be managed. Selectivity reduces strain. Strength emerges when effort is concentrated. People often mistake business for direction. Movement without removal leads to exhaustion. Clarity restores efficiency, less resistance, fewer internal debates, cleaner execution. Removal also sharpens responsibility. When excuses are removed, ownership becomes unavoidable. This is uncomfortable. It eliminates hiding places, but it also restores control. Responsibility returns agency. Agency fuels momentum. The mind seeks certainty. Removal accepts uncertainty but reduces confusion. Confusion is internal conflict. Uncertainty is external reality. One can be managed. The other must be faced. When unnecessary elements are removed, essential ones stand out. Priorities clarify. Values sharpen. Decisions accelerate. Not because complexity disappears, but because relevance increases. Clarity is not a gift. It is the result of disciplined elimination. What remains after removal is not always comforting, but it is usable. Strength does not come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing what to ignore. Motivation is often treated as the engine of progress. People wait for it, chase it, and blame its absence when they fail to act. This belief is widespread and deeply misleading. Motivation is unstable. It rises and falls with mood, environment, and circumstance. Discipline, by contrast, is structural. It does not depend on feeling ready. It functions regardless of internal conditions. Motivation responds to comfort. Discipline responds to commitment. When motivation leads, effort becomes selecting. Work happens when energy is high, when confidence is present, when conditions feel favorable. When discomfort appears, motivation withdraws. Discipline does not negotiate with discomfort. It accounts for it and proceeds anyway. The problem with relying on motivation is predictability. You cannot build consistency on something that changes daily. Systems require reliability. Progress requires repetition. Discipline provides both. It removes the question of whether to act. Action becomes default, not debate. Discipline is often misunderstood as harshness. It is not aggression toward the self. It is clarity about standards. Standards define minimum acceptable behavior regardless of mood. When standards are absent, effort becomes optional. When standards exist, effort becomes expected. Motivation asks, do I feel like it? Discipline asks, what is required? That shift changes outcomes. Requirement overrides preference. Preference is unreliable. Requirement is stable. Waiting for motivation creates dependency. People become passive observers of their own lives, waiting for the right emotional state. When it does not arrive, inertia sets in. Discipline breaks that cycle. It initiates movement first. Emotion follows later. Action changes emotional state more effectively than emotion changes action. This relationship is often reversed in people's minds. They believe feeling comes first. In practice, behavior leads. Discipline exploits this reality. By acting without permission from emotion, it forces adaptation. Discipline also reduces mental fatigue. Decision-making is exhausting when every action requires internal debate. Discipline eliminates debate. The decision has already been made. This conserves energy for execution. Motivation creates spikes of effort. Discipline creates baseline performance. Spikes look impressive, but unsustainable performance compounds. Over time, steady pressure outperforms occasional intensity. People often resist discipline because it feels restrictive. In reality, it is freeing. When behavior is automated through structure, cognitive load decreases, fewer decisions. Less internal conflict, more consistency. Discipline also protects against negative emotion. When routine exists, setbacks lose some of their impact. The system continues functioning. Momentum is maintained. Motivation collapses under pressure. Discipline absorbs it. Many people confuse discipline with punishment. They associate it with deprivation. Effective discipline about denial. It is about alignment. Behavior aligns with goals regardless of emotion. That alignment reduces regret and builds trust with oneself. Self-trust is a critical outcome of discipline. When you consistently do what you said you would do, credibility builds. Confidence increases not through affirmation, but through evidence. This confidence is stable because it is earned. Motivation seeks inspiration. Discipline creates structure. Inspiration is unpredictable. Structure is reliable. Those who depend on inspiration remain inconsistent. Those who build structure progress regardless of circumstance. Discipline is especially important when conditions are unfavorable. Stress, fatigue, and uncertainty weaken motivation. Discipline compensates. It ensures continuity when enthusiasm disappears. Over time, discipline reshapes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries and start seeing yourself as someone who executes. Identity then reinforces behavior. The system stabilizes. Motivation is useful, but it is not foundational. It amplifies discipline. It cannot replace it. Without discipline, motivation produces short, long gaps. When discipline leads, outcomes become less dependent on emotional volatility. Progress becomes predictable. Control returns. The most reliable advantage a person builds is not talent or intelligence, but behavioral consistency. Discipline does not ask how you feel. It enforces what you decided.